There are several climatic areas in the northern part of Madagascar. Specifically for the orchid in question in this video, in the northwestern coast around Mahajanga, there are two clear opposite seasons. A dry and warm period from May to November, with an average of 20 degrees Celsius in temperature, and a rainy and sometimes much hotter season from December to April, during which temperatures reach more than 35 degrees Celsius. But there is consistent humidity of 50% and higher all the time, with an incredible amount of airflow. Let me just interject here for a moment. This update was requested by Deandre O'Hare. Please know that the upcoming information I am sharing is not to deter anyone who is growing this orchid successfully in their preferred media to change anything. As long as all is going well, there is no need to change anything. However, if something is not going well, then it is my hope that the additional information is something that you can take into consideration in case you would like to tweak a few things here and there based on what comes next. Welcome to the patio, and thank you so much for being here. So, as mentioned, Oeceoclades spathilufera is native to a small region of northern and western Madagascar. The altitude range is approximately 30 to 900 meters above sea level. This species grows naturally in sandy and porous gravel mixed with soil in forests, on coastal dunes, all the way up into somewhat montane deciduous woodlands. The conditions under which it grows naturally makes it a remarkable xerophytic, medium-sized, warm-growing terrestrial orchid. If you are considering growing this orchid in an organic media mix, then may I suggest that you can get some cacti-specific soil and mix in another 30% of horticultural sand to almost get the same media in which this orchid grows naturally. And you could bury the pseudobulbs if the media is as mentioned, because naturally the pseudobulbs are not exposed to the elements because the conditions are extremely harsh where this orchid grows in its natural habitat. This orchid depends on the stored energy in its pseudobulbs in order to survive the drought period from May through to November. And the reason these pseudobulbs will not rot where it grows naturally once the rainy season kicks in is because during the rainy season it is super hot, where temperatures reach more than 35 degrees Celsius, and we know how quickly water evaporates on the top 5 centimeters of the media in hot temperatures like that. Besides, there is an incredible amount of airflow to further dry out the sand even faster. So if you can provide those kinds of conditions when the orchid is in active growth, then burying the pseudobulbs is definitely an option and will not pose a threat to the orchid. Now, because I cannot provide the conditions this orchid likes all year round, I have opted for my setup with Leca and self-watering, and I do not dare bury the pseudobulbs because my winter temperatures go down to 14 degrees Celsius. Brr for me, and definitely brr for the orchid. But she is holding on. Now, in nature, this orchid can tolerate direct sun if the pseudobulbs are buried, because if they were not buried, they would scorch. So in private cultivation with the pseudobulbs exposed, I highly recommend to keep this orchid in the brightest shade possible with only direct sun exposure during early morning or very late afternoon. If you can, then get as much media up and around the pseudobulbs so that any new root growth will go straight into the media and not have to hang out in the elements too long. You see, keeping the base of the orchid proud of the media is not ideal in this case because the roots will frazzle. Despite these roots being super spongy, there is not much to them. Their size and fleshy texture should not mislead you to think that they are tough. On the contrary, they are super susceptible to drying out, or better said, collapsing when they don't find the damp, dark, protected media immediately. Remember that this orchid is a terrestrial orchid, and the reason it does well in semi-hydroponics, and with that does not get a hard dry drought period in this setup, is because Leca should never be allowed to dry out in this setup, or else it will start to draw moisture from the roots because of the wicking characteristics of Leca. So now I also understand if you're thinking in this setup, the orchid does not get a hard drought period, as it would in its natural habitat. So what gives? Why is it still growing well and not rotting? That is because it is a terrestrial orchid, and Leca in a semi-hydroponic setup was initially introduced to the plant world for terrestrial houseplants for a cleaner and more sustainable way of growing plants. So any terrestrial orchid will do well in Leca, and I can say that with confidence. Everything else that could go wrong is growers' error or environmental influences, as in low temperatures or lack of light or even pests. So please always ask questions in the comment section if you have any doubts as to what I am saying, or if what I say sounds like I'm contradicting myself. Give me the opportunity to be more specific in a reply based on your observations. Thank you so much. Having addressed the media mix options, let's just talk about repotting this orchid, and you would want to do that when a new growth is just barely starting to show the pseudobulbs swelling at the base. No new roots will appear at that time, but they will within a month after seeing the new pseudobulbs starting to swell. While this orchid does not dump its roots because of a repot, I highly recommend you do not trim any viable roots just because they may show a browning at the tip. The root is viable even with a browning tip, but to cut those tips off will cause the root to fail because of its spongy characteristics. Also, these roots do not branch, so once a root is compromised even in the slightest, it will fail. You can see in this image that there is still a nice viable root, one of many, on the previous growth, and just to show you this, I removed some of the leca, which I will place back to keep the roots covered up. But it gives you a great visual of how these roots grow and their longevity when left undamaged. While mine has never bloomed, just a little fun fact, if the blooms did not show all the markers of being an orchid, this plant would be considered a Madagascar succulent, further proving that it can take a hard drought while not in active growth, and only if grown in the organic media mix that I just mentioned. Now, may I ask you to please take a moment to give this video a thumbs up, also share it around. I would appreciate the support so much, and if you would subscribe to the channel, then thank you, thank you, thank you. I also briefly mentioned pests, so here is what has happened to mine since it arrived on the patio in 2019. Nothing really untoward until 2023. She was growing like clockwork, new growths, etc. But in 2023, she contracted spider mites, and that took out the leaves of the new growth prematurely. Also, a factor could be ants during the blooming phase, because they will pollinate the blooms really quickly, producing seed pods, which is not detrimental to the orchid, but if yours is in bloom and the blooms happen to wilt prematurely, that is possibly because of ants and not because you did anything wrong. Also, scale. Now, these are here just because of my conditions. It's too cold for the orchid, she's not getting enough light, etc, etc, etc. So, while scale may not be an issue in your climate, it is never a bad idea to give a little heads up to be on the lookout. During the months of non-active growth, I only ever maintain the water availability at half capacity in the reservoir, and I do not fertilize at all. Once I see a new growth emerging, then I apply 150 parts per million of a well-balanced fertilizer, which includes calcium and magnesium. However, I also supplement with calcium nitrate or CalMag once a month, and that also at a strength of 150 parts per million. If you keep in mind that this orchid has succulent traits, you will know that it does not need a lot of fertilizer to grow well. Too much of a good thing can lead to root burn, so also make sure to flush between nutrient applications with just plain water. And I hope that this update and the additional information provided was helpful. Remember the comment section? It's there for a reason. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, what your experience is with this orchid, or of course any questions to the details I may have left out. Thank you so much, DeAndre O'Hare, for the update request. I hope I did it justice. Also, thank you for watching. I appreciate your time and wish you a fabulous day, on the condition, though, please, that you stay safe. Take care. Bye.